customers tend to strike straight for a solution, and they ask maybe for something that they think they want, but they actually want something else. If you would really understand them, you could actually solve the real problem, the problem behind the problem. Initially, right, it's the customer doesn't want a drill, he wants a hole because he wants to get his painting on the wall or something. But then actually, if you want to get the painting on the wall, you could also give him a sticker or tape. Even a hole is already too quickly thought. You never built it at once. You try to understand, hey, customer, I want to create the best experience. Tell me what's bothering you, and I can maybe find a better solution.
Welcome back to How to Love a Customer, the show where we dive into the wild, wonderful, and sometimes downright weird world of customer experience. I'm Mihail, co-founder at Chattermill, and in each episode, I talk to the people behind great brands who know that customer interactions, even the messy ones, are the moments of truth. And our guest today, I'm really excited about the guest today, is Lennard Winters, who works in product management at one of the best-known brands in the world, one of my favorite brands, IKEA. So Lennard, welcome to How to Love a Customer.
Yeah, thanks a lot, because happy to be here.
Fantastic. Lennard, well, it's great to have you. You know, IKEA is a company of one. It's one of the few brands that you can't even properly think of a competitor. To be honest, it's not a Coke and Pepsi situation. Very much a unique company in the world.
There are some, but
there are definitely competitors.
There
are definitely competitors. No one has it, but not quite the same sort of situation. But yes, I'm really excited to dig into it. And before we do that, though, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. So, how did you first get into product management, and how you came to IKEA?
Yeah, well, product management is somewhat unconsciously happened. IKEA is a way more conscious choice. So very quickly, maybe I'll start with my studies, because I think I started with marketing. I did my master's in marketing. And I think what's probably going to come back in this conversation is what I think the similarities between marketing, customer experience, and product management. Because I think they in the end all boil down to really understanding customer problems and solving for them. Or customer needs is maybe even a better word. When I was in university, I didn't know all of that, of course. So after university, I started in consulting because that was what everyone wanted to do back then. From there, I got into a startup for a little under a year. Then I actually started doing product management within a consulting firm. And then I moved over to IKEA to do product management there, very high level.
Awesome. Fantastic. And I saw on your LinkedIn that you lead IKEA's global customer audience platform. I don't know what it is, but I'm already fascinated. Can you tell us and the listeners a little bit more about this?
Yeah, of course. Well, don't get too fascinated, but it's fun. I do it for years already. It's an exciting topic. It's within marketing technology, actually. So I'm doing product management within the topic that I love, which is why it's for me so interesting. Audience platform means it's within audience management. So for the people who are closer in marketing technology may already know what it means. But what me, my team, and my fellow product managers are doing is ensuring that our IKEA customers get to see the right message at the right time in the right channel. And audience management is the piece of the puzzle that figures out right? Who's the customer? So we get to show ads, push notifications, emails, slightly changing web and app experiences based on what we know of our IKEA customers.
And yeah, of course, IKEA is such a fascinating brand. Can you tell us a bit more about what does thinking about product in IKEA and the approach to customer experience, and maybe how it differs to some of the other companies like you've been working at before, or you're familiar with from talking to other people in the community?
So how IKEA works with customer experience. So I think I'd love to start a bit with how I look at maybe product management and customer experience as two things, if that makes sense. And then I can explain a bit how we as IKEA are organized and my personal vision to it, maybe. So how we're organized at IKEA, right? So maybe one thought I wanted to start with is maybe I can actually phrase it as a question to you, Mika. What do you think if you think about product management versus customer experience? How would you look at that?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I think we tend to think here at Chat, that everything you do is customer experience, right? Product management is have customer experience. Marketing is also customer experience, and of course, customer support. Dealing with unhappy people or people who are reaching out with a question. That's also part of customer experience. For me, like product management is more kind of once you've looked at all the customer experience, deciding what you're actually going to do about this, like actually kind of like implementing some kind of changes. But there is a lot more to it as well, like things like I said, the marketing, the brand you are building, the customer service relationship with customers you have. In your case, I guess I would also think like stores play such a huge part in the whole customer experience. And sometimes product manager would probably want to look at kind of the digital part of the product rather than the store, but they actually all work together, right? And there is an operational side of the business of like making sure that you actually have the stock and kind of can actually, and I don't even know, to be honest, like which part of the product you sit for. Like, is it the people who come up with the chairs and tables and all that, the lamps and all that stuff, or it's just the digital part, which like is more about how to sell it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that reflection because indeed, I think you can see customer experience as the broadest sense of everything, which probably makes sense, but then it also becomes sort of everything. Yeah, and maybe a funny quick step is indeed product management, of course, exists for physical products for ages, and then for technical products, well, definitely for over a decade, but only recently became very structured, right? And yes, to be clear, I'm a technical product manager. Although, of course, IKEA is one of those companies, a retail company with a lot of products, furniture, which is amazing product management, right? If you look at the design, every product designer, like physical product designer, wants to work at IKEA, right? So there was this moment. This was one of the reasons why I loved to join as digital product manager at IKEA, because back then I thought maybe there's something to learn from how such a company so good in product management would do that in digital product management. To be fast forward, those two worlds are so far from each other that not very explicitly came in my career. Yeah, I don't want to be too basic, but there's this very famous thing in product management, right, where a successful product consists out of feasibility, viability, and desirability. Often referred to from Marty Kagan's, I think, book Inspired, on how to build products that customers love. So that there's a very clear connect with what customers love, customer experience, right? One of the three main elements of a successful product is desirability. Do your customers really love your product? I think that is where our topics are so closely and excitingly related. And on that topic, often a digital product team has a UX designer, right? And I think clearly UX is smaller than customer experience, because customer experience is more or less everything, as you also sort of set the scene for. But it is closely related, I believe, because as a product manager, I feel very grateful that I have dedicated people thinking about service design and user experience design. I think when I was working at a startup, for example, if you're a product manager of a smaller product, it could very well be that you don't have a dedicated or specific person looking after the topic of desirability, and you look at it yourself as a product manager, because this is ultimately one of the three elements and the element that we zoom into in this podcast that brings a successful product. Do you really understand what your customer is trying to do? What's the problem he's trying to solve for? And are you able to find a meaningful way to solve for that problem? And then, of course, we do that with technology. And there the whole part comes about, okay, is that even doable with technology, right? The feasibility part, which is a whole element that we're not going to talk about today. viability, would it bring money? Figure out what's the pricing mechanism, what's the competition doing, and so forth. Well, we're not going to talk about that too much today, but there you already do see, I think, what is the clear link with marketing. That's what I learned literally in school. Competitor analysis, market analysis, seeing trends, technology trends, figuring out the pricing strategy, go to market, that whole part. And then there's desirability. And there I think is the part that thrives me the most. And actually when we had this quick pre-chat, I had this thought about what I actually learned at university a long time ago that forever stuck with me. I don't know whose quote this is, but there's this famous quote in marketing, and I think later on also being used in product management. Customers don't ask for a drill, but they ask for a hole. Have you heard about that little phrase before?
Not specifically in that. I think I kind of can guess what it implies, but I haven't heard that specific phrase now.
I should maybe look up which professor whatsoever it was. But yeah, so as you probably see, customers tend to strike straight for a solution, and they ask maybe for something that they think they want, but they actually want something else. If you would really understand them, you could actually solve the real problem, the problem behind the problem. And then I think the example that first comes to mind, sort of initially, right? It's the customer doesn't want a drill; he wants a hole because he wants to list his, I don't know, get his painting on the wall or something. But then actually, if you want to get the painting on the wall, you could also give him a sticker or tape, right? So even a hole is already too quickly thought. So point being, think about customer needs, and you can keep going until it doesn't make too much sense anymore. But I think this is the core of how we work with understanding our customers in product management and within IKEA, so that we get to the right level of the actual customer need. And in product management, then this often gets also transferred or translated into feature requests, right? Which is it's a very relevant term. Often a customer thinks he knows what he wants, so he asks for a red button, or I need a search bar there, or I need, more technically, I need an API integration there. You never build that at once. You try to understand, hey, customer, I want to create the best experience. Tell me what's bothering you, and I can maybe find a better solution.
And I'm curious a little bit, like with being such a global brand, where most of your competitors, as far as I can tell, are kind of like more local, maybe the exception of Wayfair, right? Like, how do you guys kind of see this? Is there ever like this tension that a specific market would prefer this, but we can't do it because maybe some other markets don't value it as much? Or would you actually just build different properties for different markets? How does it work?
I mean, the textbook answer is we only build for global, right? If you're in a SaaS company, you only build features for all customers.
Well, you know what? We occasionally work with companies where that's not the case. Like Uber, they have like very different ways of working with different countries. Where in some times you have motorbikes, sometimes you have bicycles, and sometimes you have in London there are boats. You can book on the Uber app and all of that stuff. So it's a very different app, market to market.
Yeah, no, true. So of course, because there's differences between markets. So and that's the same reality where we are in and where I'm in with my products. But I think we're pretty good in doing most of it. Really, 90% or more is literally global, and then there's some local exceptions. For our situation, that's actually mainly because of legislation. What are you allowed to do with customer data? That differs definitely between Europe, Asia, and the States. But even within those continents, there's differences in either legislation or interpretation of it. So that's where most of my products differences come from.
Awesome.
That's what you're referring to, right? Or were you asking for how's IKEA as a company even?
Well, I was asking about both, to be honest. Like I think our listeners, as far as I know, are very interested in the kind of understanding like the dynamics of different industries, right? Because sometimes there are things you don't think about, like hospitality, industry versus energy versus like e-commerce and so on. So and this is a fascinating industry because it is kind of an example of e-commerce essentially, right? But a very different example than what people usually think, where it's like small transactions, things that are kind of easily delivered, right? Like IKEA is a very different sort of beast. So I was curious, kind of like how does that affect the type of decisions you end up making?
Yeah, so as a broader company, of course, we're an enormous company, right? We have, 50 billion revenues, 500 stores in 50 plus markets or something like that. So I'm not the guy involved in all those decisions. What I do know, what I think is relevant to understand is we're an omnichannel retailer. And the core of our offering is still our range. We in IKEA really believe in the furniture that we're offering. And that we do also localize, for example. So don't pinpoint me on the numbers, but I think, for example, there's 10,000 articles in our range, and every market is allowed to get 10% local products in the range. Something like that. Maybe that's a fun fact on the side on how we try to localize while remaining standardized. Of course, in our digital products, but also in our offline offering. And yes, delivery works differently, and the pricing of that works differently, and so forth.
Lennard, how about we jump into some of your stories, and we'll probably explore this in a bit more detail with, on a real case study, if that makes sense. So, what story? I think you bring us to two stories, by the way. But let's start with the first one. So, let's break it down, kind of what happened and what made it impactful.
I'm gonna bring two stories. My first one is close to home, like in my product, what I just explained. Another one is a bit in the broader IKEA. We had this quick pre-chat where we already figured along the lines of IKEA being an enormous company, I can bring a million, I guess, funny or less funny stories about how our customers behave online and offline, and how we anticipated on that. First one, we did this customer interview. Basically the product discovery technique where we had deep conversations with some of our customers. We were talking about the relevancy of advertisements, right? So if you have browsed the IKEA website and you continue to browse on different webs, or you scroll in your Facebook app or whatsoever. And the one insight that always stayed with me is that customers don't even bother to save products on their wish list or in their cart, for example, because they're so convinced or used to getting retargeted soon after that they think like, okay, whatever the company saves for me what I'm looking after, and I'll see it popping up, and if I need it, I'll click on one of those ads instead of proactively saving it yourself.
So what did you guys do in response to this insight?
Yeah, the basic action remains okay. So we should keep on advertising, which we knew and which we were planning to do anyway. It's more like this basic insight that sometimes we talk about evolving customer needs, or customers expect more and more. Apparently, there's a group of customers who are, to some extent, spoiled or so used of this personalization in their surroundings that it's actually proof point of the other way around. It's if we would stop, this is what we would lose. So we couldn't action upon more specific on personalizing more for this group, or ensuring we would double the ad spend on this specific group, because it's too hard to figure out. But it was more proof point of we should definitely keep on doing what we're doing. And yes, customers' evolving needs also means that they need us to do this.
So customers kind of perceive your advertising as almost like part of your product, right? And so they sort of expect you to do it as a sort of tool to remind them which chair they were looking at, or sofa or whatever. And that's very interesting. And that then, like, does that kind of then chain you to, like, we now have to keep spending, so we're sort of like I don't know, a little bit of a prisoner of this whole thing that we've started doing it. People got used to it, now we kind of have to keep doing it.
Yes, to some extent it is. And the funny thing is, back referring to my university moment, there already was this famous quote in marketing. I know I'm spending twice the money on marketing that I should. It's just that I don't know which 50% I should cut. Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think the reality is 20 years later that even though we can measure a lot and we can improve a lot, it's still so hard to attribute exactly what comes from where. So it's probably no longer 50%, but we're still probably spending on things that we shouldn't. But then again, we can't stop, and that was proven again here by this customer insight.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, it's
funny, right?
It's unexpected that advertising is part of like the product management strategy. Essentially, like usually, people kind of organize it almost like in different teams, right? Very different teams where like someone does advertising, someone does product, but there are these as we were talking earlier, it's all customer experience in the end, and they kind of have to work together in that sense.
Yeah. And then maybe another story, which is, this is maybe not, I don't know. It's hard to apply these insights maybe for our listeners. I don't know. Maybe you're working in marketing technology as well, and like I knew I was on the right track. But another one that always stuck to me, which is not my product teams, right, who were working on it, but more shows a couple of things. I guess I can first quickly say what it is. There was this team presenting within an IKEA forum what they did, and they changed actually the paper receipts. It's the things you get at the counter, right? So there's a digital product team looking after that as well, and they actually found out that there's a few things on the receipts that doesn't make any sense. They checked if customers were using it for what would happen if we cut this out, and then it turns out they removed a few white spaces and a few lines of I don't remember the details of what was on there, which led to shorter receipts. But because of the scale of IKEA, that meant literally millions of cost savings, and I don't remember how many trees it brought to the company, right? So it's the stupidest thing, but brought a lot of value, and not hurting the customer.
But sorry, was it not hurting the customer? Because I said I understood that you started with that like things didn't make sense on the receipts.
No, so they checked with the customer whether it still made sense if they would wipe out X, Y, Z, and by finding out that it was clutter in the first place, that no one cared about if it would be gone. They found a cost saving.
Guide us through sort of like, how this idea and the product kind of comes about. So what sort of like frameworks, like, obviously, I guess somewhere someone decides like, what if we just use a little bit less paper? That's an obvious cost saving across the board. And then, I see this all the time, even in our company where we don't use paper, but we see, every time we see like, there's a little bit of here and a little bit there that we can save. But how do you then kind of translate it into actual action? You said like, we checked with the customer. How does this work at an IKEA scale?
Yeah, so this story isn't necessarily someone who started thinking, where can we do cost savings, right? Although I don't remember, or I can trace back how this exactly went. But this is, for me, it's a beautiful story of how a digital product team is responsible for a clearly defined scope and tries to figure out how can we create value. And in doing so, talk to customers, show them a prototype, right? Very simple in this case, a shorter receipt. Would it still work? In doing so, finding out how can we create value. And in this case, and I really love that as an example, by removing things, because I think this is very often the problem. Once you have a mature product, you keep adding and adding more features. It's so hard to be cutting things out.
So the motivation was, how can we make receipts clearer to customers? first of all, right? And then it delivered cost savings as a byproduct.
Exactly. So while you're in discovery and remain in touch with your customers, you can find out, are we still actually solving the problem that we were intending for? And the product of a paper receipt is, of course, how old are paper receipts? Like it's there forever. But thinking about, okay, what should we actually remove, and how can that make it more viable in this case?
Okay, and so yeah, if you can guide me a little bit like down to like a bit more detail. So why was it something that you decided to solve? Like, most of the time people say like, on my receipt, I don't even pay attention to it. Kind of why was it even kind of like a somewhat of a priority for you to start thinking about? Like, did it come from customer feedback or from just someone, like some frustrations or someone on the team? Kind of how did these things happen?
Yeah, so this was not close enough to my home to bring you that perfect answer, to be honest. And but I think in reality those things often come hand in hand, right? So that there may indeed be one customer being explicit about it that started the thinking. It could be a drive for cost efficiency, someone saying, where can you cut? It could be an engineer who was figuring out, who had to redo something, which happens in my team, right? He's going over something, and by doing so, the other week, an engineer told me, like, I found 50,000 lines of code, like for that piece of the product that is working. He's like, yeah, I also don't know if I think I can clean it up big time, right? So I think there's a lot of sources of good ideas of how you can bring more value in your product, which means for the customer.
And can you guide us kind of how this, like, again, at IKEA scale, with like all the different customers you have in different markets, obviously like very different types of families, people who use you, kind of how do you even understand what the customers kind of want and care about, when and which then leads to these kind of decisions? Like what's the process?
Exactly, and maybe here I can zoom out a bit more, like how we're organized in IKEA, and step away from the specific examples for a moment at least. There's many ways how we do so, and yes, I think with the stores from the old days, we already have an enormous, great source of information. Right, there's hundreds of coworkers working with millions of customers every day in the store. So that is a clear line. The whole sales organization in the stores is a clear source of customer input. But here in the sort of global office where I'm working in digital, we also have a whole consumer insight team. We have research, and then we have what in our digital organization is called DXD, so digital experience design, including service designers who do either research or do discovery. If I bring that down to what we're doing in literally my office, this whole org helps talking to customers every other month. I think they organize customer interviews. They come literally to the office. They ensure that we get that the product teams can bring in questions, prototypes, whatever they want to get in front of the customer's eyes. And that organization also is in all the product teams, right? Again, there you get more into maybe user experience, and it's maybe a very limited view of customer experience. But that, of course, in digital product management is a very clear link, I would say, to ensuring that customers' problems and needs are the sole thing that we're trying to build our products for.
And how do product managers then sort of find, I guess, like feedback more about like a very specific area that they're interested in, and make sure that it's not kind of biased, because that is something that we kind of intuitively do quite often, I think, all of us.
That's only human. So your question is, how do you avoid human bias in your product?
Well, a little bit of both. Kind of like, first of all, how to find feedback. Again, there's such a volume of feedback at IKEA that like when you are working on receipts, right, or something like very, very specific, it presumably is quite hard to find like, okay, what are people saying specifically at receipts? Like, is it something that like you go and do proactive research about, ask people about receipts, or kind of that consumer insights team can figure without find you those very targeted kind of insight about it.
Yeah, it's both. And then, I mean, closer to my product, of course, and to my heart is we do get a lot of data, right? On clicks, likes, shares, reads, opens, and so forth. So that of all that engagement data is saying something about what the customer likes, right? Bounce rates and so forth. So
of course, and that's like amazing. But the one of the reasons I love the receipt story is like this is something
not good enough. I feel.
No. I'm just saying, like, again, thinking about the receipt story, and like this receipt story for me is a perfect example of something like that can't come from this kind of data, right? Because that's not something you can kind of see like how many times people click on a paper receipt, right? So that is one, like I love these stories in particular because they are things that you can't get from behavioral data, right? Of like what have people done, because you never observe that part of customer experience. And in fact, like I think most companies would probably just completely ignore what happens to the paper receipt, right? So I'm curious, kind of like how does that insight even come about? Obviously, I know you mentioned you weren't involved directly, but how does these types of insights come about?
Yeah, and I could perfectly imagine how it must have been, because I think, okay, maybe my data answer was too obvious, but I think it's the first layer of how do you get to customer insights. The core is my task number one as a product manager is understand your customer needs, right? And then you figure out, okay, what's the biggest problem? What's a joint problem? How can we solve for it technically? How can we make a viable business out of it? But understand customer problems. And as long as your product scope is well defined, and that is, I mean, that's in a big corporate organization, a whole different ballgame than if you're working in a startup or independent SaaS company, for example, right? Imagine that your scope is the receipt, or maybe, I don't know how it's framed. Maybe it's almost a post-purchase order confirmation, for example. As a product manager, then it's your duty to figure out how that remains feasible, viable, desirable. And for paper receipt, maybe desirable is, I don't know. There's a lot of things you can do with the receipt. Like you can get loyalty points. You can maybe just
ask for
feedback, for returns.
And so on, yeah.
Yeah. So before saying that.
So what I'm kind of getting is like you split areas of responsibility by customer journey, right? And so someone owns this part of customer journey, which could be post-purchase experience, right? Or even just like the receipt part, maybe even further, right? But let's say post-purchase experience. And so someone owns that experience, it's then their job to understand their customer any way they can see. So probably people do some proactive interviewing. They look at kind of whatever feedback they can get their hands on, try to find it, like, whatever it's available. Some is being collected. It sounds like obviously like IKEA also generates a lot of like social media and other types of feedback as well. Probably some people kind of reach out to you saying like, oh, I couldn't understand the receipt, and sort of proactively, right? So they kind of have that that volume of feedback that I'm interested in how easy it is to work with it, but
I think you have some improvements potentially.
Yeah, but separately to that, also I guess kind of like there is this big organizational drive. So how do they then kind of map the two? So yeah, customers express all sorts of frustrations with post-purchase experience, right? But then as an organization, we have goals of, let's say, in this case, reducing cost, but also maybe kind of increasing customer happiness, or retention goals and something like that. So you just kind of work to connect the two in some fashion, and from there decide like, okay, this is actually surprisingly a powerful thing we can do, because it actually helps us actually save a lot of cost. It drives customer happiness, and it's probably quite cheap to do at the same time.
Yeah, that's I think a funny part of this story, right? Because of the scale, it suddenly turns out to be a good idea to spend some time on it.
Yeah.
But yes, more overarching, you're right. So there's a lot of sources for customer feedback. It can be straight out easy data that comes in. It can be customer complaints. It can be part of your work as product manager to proactively seek for input based on interviews, based on research you could request from the customer insight team.
And how do then kind of like teams and product managers, and some companies I speak to, they have more autonomy to just like, if they think it's right, like just go and do it. In your part of customer journey, you can kind of go and just do it yourself. In others, it obviously like is like every part of customer journey is so expensive that like the cost of a mistake, let's say, is so expensive that you want to get kind of approval and then kind of globally decide like, here are the priorities we're going to work on this quarter. And then it sort of like bubbles up and then bubbles down, right? Kind of how is it structured at IKEA, and what works well?
Yeah, and this is a tricky topic, I think, for every large organization. I think IKEA. So what every organization probably tries to do is get empowered independent product teams, right? Who indeed can autonomously figure out what's the most valuable thing to work upon and execute upon it. That's what IKEA tries to do. But then the question becomes, okay, what is then an independent product? You do need to align with the broader organization. So yeah, I don't think we can avoid going a bit up and down every now and then. Yes, what happens at IKEA is bigger, longer term plannings as well, which you actually try to be conscious of because you want to remain agile. I think IKEA is doing pretty okay in finding the middle ground there. IKEA has a very strong culture, is a Swedish culture as well, which is not too hierarchical, and that every opinion matters, which is sometimes slowing down. But I think in this case does bring room for a lot of product teams to do whatever they believe is the most valuable for IKEA.
And do you think like there is anything, or what is it about kind of the culture that is special, different at IKEA, that like an insight like this, that we can actually kind of like save money, improve customers' life, all while actually not putting like that much effort into it. Like is that a sort of like a very typical sort of thing to happen at IKEA, or something connected to the culture, or more of a one-off story, let's say?
Well, I think it's quite typical in the sense that it's definitely be encouraged to be entrepreneurial always, right? And we as product managers get triggered to do our work, and also I can push back, so to say, like don't tell me what to do, right? If I recommend you to do this. So I think it's pretty natural, and there's enough room for way more of these stories.
No, I'm curious because obviously IKEA is known as a company where cost is treated as a very important part of the business, because like you want to keep the prices very low, right, for the customers. And so
the IKEA magic, we call it.
Okay,
we want to sell more so we can be cheaper.
Tell us more about this. How does that kind of feature into product management?
That straight connection is hard to make, to be honest. But you're right. The whole idea of IKEA is how can we believe so strongly in not only our range but also our business model, how we do business, also for a better society. That we truly believe if we can get to more customers, reach the many, as we would call it in the official vision terminology, we can scale further. We can even be cheaper, and then we can sell more. That's what we call the IKEA magic. How does that translate to how we do product management? Yeah, to be frank, it's a bit hard to say. The basic thinking is the same, right? If we can scale to everything, and for technology is scalable per definition, we can be more efficient. I think the other side of the coin is also fair to mention. We're a large organization. You can't avoid getting some hierarchy in there. You cannot avoid having some duplication. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I love this kind of as a way to finish that section of the podcast. So how about we switch gears a little bit, and then I have a hot take round that's part of our every episode. So I'm gonna give you a question, and you can just go with your gut. We can expand the length or just give a short answer. So yeah, what's customer experience, or for that matter, product management trend or buzzword that you wish we'd retire?
Hyper personalization is a word. It's not personal product management, but a word in marketing technology is being used a lot. Hyper personalization. It's like yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you think about it, but what does it even mean? Right? Is it like personalization, but then mega good or something like that? It almost feels like, and then not talking about the potential creepiness that comes from it. Like if it gets hyper personal, do I even want that? So I'm like, stop it. If you want to personalize your messaging, do it, right? It
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense.
that,
We
that's
get it.
obviously always been a big topic. Like, do customers have actually not want this much personalization? There's this famous story about, I think, about Target in the States, where, the personalization was working so well that it kind of told the family that their daughter was pregnant before she even knew, or something like that. I don't remember exactly. But they started recommending sort of like specific products and things like that. And I've always enjoyed that story. Like, it's funny, but it does point to like a real issue with that sort of product. Is that something like you do see kind of customers grappling with? Because obviously, like, your first story was about how personalization actually is something people kind of rely on almost as like they expect it to happen at this point. But at what point does it become a challenge?
Yeah, I think in general, what we know from our customers is that they're fine if we use their data, if it makes sense to them. And I think actually that first story I told is a perfect example of it.
Yeah.
Customers like that we show them the products that they were actually thinking of buying. It makes sense. The example you're giving is clearly so far on the continuum that it becomes creepy. What gets in between is a bit difficult to exactly find out. What I know for sure is IKEA wants to stay on the safe side. That's close, I think, to our culture. We're trying to help our family members, as we call our loyalty members, of course. Yeah, but don't get creepy.
Awesome. And given we are a customer experience podcast generally, what is a brand outside of IKEA that you think is killing it in customer experience? Like what is a brand that maybe you look up to?
Yeah, I thought about this a bit because I saw this question, and I couldn't get away from Tesla.
A controversial one these days.
This is the point. I wanted to say, for political reasons, I'm not super glad to call it out, but I go back to this moment that I stepped for the first time in the car, and it goes so well together with cut away the clutter, right? So I remember the moment I stepped in a Tesla. I was like, is this how a dashboard could look like? Do you remember the moment that you for the first time stepped in what we know every electric car does?
I think Tesla is a fascinating example, because I think everyone kind of has that experience, even though kind of like when you spend a little bit more time in the Tesla, you started learning that like actually the experience like of driving it is not as great as maybe like it could be. Like it's a little bit noisy. It's like the finish is maybe not that great. Like they're like it's a little bit bumpy, like things like that, compared to like at least like the best sort of German cars or things like that. But you do kind of like it's a little bit like Apple as well. Like you do especially when you first step into it, you kind of think like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I think what for me it's actually like a little bit similar to IKEA, that like they obviously had to like slash the cost quite a bit, and so they maybe made those decisions because they wanted the car to be still affordable, but they actually made it in such a way that like it still looks very nice, and obviously it's very popular.
Yeah, no, but you're right. Yeah, I could also have said Apple, but it almost feels even more obvious. But yes,
Yeah.
everything in life, right? If you really know what you're after, you can do it with the bare minimum. Great poets write with a few words. IKEA furniture is the simplest on earth. The first iPhone only had one button, and the Tesla didn't have any buttons on their dashboard. So, yeah, and then of course, to not forget, the receipt didn't have any white noise or gray noise anymore on it.
Awesome. And what is maybe some recent interaction, or maybe it is a Tesla, but kind of recent interaction within your brand that you thought like, okay, this was a really good customer experience?
I had this very stupid, literally yesterday that happened. A local delivery company who sent me the simplest track and trace link. Do you want to get an SMS before we arrive? Put your number here, choose 15, 30, 90 minutes. Like there was 2 fields. We get to you between 7 and 9. You want an SMS. I loved it.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. And do you have an example of a terrible customer experience recently?
Yes, definitely. I was because the good experience was a simple UX, right? So the smallest version of customer experience. The thing that was horrible that I could probably have a rant about for an hour, which I will save to you, but was a telco provider.
This is frequently the category of companies that comes up.
Right. But also because it's, I think, especially on the topic of customer experience, the systems were not connected. The employees were not talking to each other. They didn't see my customer information. Sort of everything was unconnected, unrelated. It was impossible to get to them. I had to retell the story. That person was really willing to help me on the other side of the line, but couldn't because the system wasn't working. The experience from onboarding to offboarding, literally everything failed.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think we underestimate how many companies still need to go through the digital transformation. Awesome, and maybe just not to end on this note. One of the things I kind of always ask customer experience leaders, and it's a little bit different in product, but still, I'm curious, kind of like, how do you, as a team, as a company, kind of approach AI? Obviously, like, things are changing so quickly these days. Kind of like, yeah. Any insight on that from what you've seen at IKEA?
How do you treat AI? Yeah, that's.
I know it's a very broad topic, but yeah, whatever feels.
A few thoughts
tangible.
pop to mind. Let's see. First, it's very well embedded in the whole structure of digital. So we work with an organization where we have product engineering, user experience design, and data analytics, where the whole AI topic is landed. There's an AI center of excellence created with people working on it. For products, it's explicitly be pushed to think two-way about the topic, right? How can you use for your product management tasks AI? I don't know. Summarize user stories, get the customer insights. You can use it in any ways. And the other way around, right? How can AI be part of your products, or how would you run an AI product? On that latter one, very, very important topic on my domain. The whole agentic workforce is going to help build marketing campaigns, get the right customer data, create the relevant content for the relevant channel to it, right? So I think in my daily work, it's super relevant. And IKEA is encouraging to do both. Both being, how can you include it in your daily tasks, and the other way around, how can your product be built on AI? Another thought is that, sorry for a random dump of AI thoughts. We get access to all the big, most recent AI models to work on that topic of how can you include it in your task. So I have my own portal where I can choose right between the latest Sonnet, GPT, Gemini, whatever.
Are you guys thinking about at this point, or is it too early, about kind of like that, there is a conversation that like in the world of the future, it will be AI agents buying products rather than people, right? And so like our websites and all that stuff like potentially will completely change. And instead like it will be, a ChatGPT buying it rather than a human. Is that like, first of all, is it already happening? I guess not. But is it something like you're thinking about at this point, or is it too early?
I'm not aware of it, but I would, as I mentioned, that AI Center of Excellence, who is working on somewhat more futuristic use cases, probably have it on their long list. So, if we really wanted to have the answer, I would ask it there. But it's an intriguing question.
Fantastic. Awesome, Lennard. Well, thank you so much for being part of How to Love a Customer. I think there's a
My
lot
pleasure.
for our listeners to enjoy here from the stories. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode of How to Wow a Customer, please subscribe, tell a friend, and join us next time for more stories about the power of listening to your customers. Thank you.